Well, I hope you're doing well. I hope that you're enjoying the rain now instead of all the snow. I know that I am. I'm definitely enjoying the warmer weather. It's kind of funny because after, you have wind chills where the temperature is like 0 degrees and then it warms up to 50 degrees, it feels like it's summer. So it's a much welcome change, at least in my opinion. But I hope you're not sick or hurting in any way. If you are, please let us know. We want to know that. We want to be praying for you. We don't have any announcements tonight, so we'll just go ahead and jump straight into the lesson. Eve, you know why God doesn't want you to eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden. That is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Eve, you know why God doesn't want you to do that, don't you? Because God knows that in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God. You know what I'm referring to, right? I'm referring to what we read in Genesis chapter 3. That's the assertion that the serpent makes to Eve. Eve, God doesn't want you to eat of that fruit, because if you eat of that fruit, you're going to be like him. And if you're like him, then you're not going to need him. You'll be your own God in a sense. That assertion, that idea that we read about in Genesis chapter 3 that's brought forth by the serpent, that idea is at the root of what drives people toward idolatry. In fact, that idea, you'll be your own God, is at the heart of why idolatry has existed in both the past and the present. Now, we think about idolatry from in the past. I'm thinking about, when we read our Old Testament and we read about idolatry, what we're reading about, is somebody that has decided to craft this sort of figurine and perhaps has taken their time, and this figurine is very delicate and intricate in some way. Perhaps it's overlaid with some type of precious metal. Maybe it's overlaid in silver, maybe it's overlaid in gold, and then this figurine is taken to some type of permanent location, some type of central location, maybe a temple, and it's put there so that people can come and worship this figurine. Now, we know this because we read about idolatry in the Old Testament, but we ask ourselves, okay, these little figurines that were so well crafted, what are they? Well, at the end of the day, it's wood, or it's some type of metal overlaid in some type of precious metal. That's what it is. It doesn't make sense to us, but to the person that created it, what is it? Well, that's the question, isn't it? To the person that created it, what is that idol? That's God. That's whatever the Creator wants it to be. Did you catch it? That's whatever the Creator wants it to be. That's what drags people into idolatry. They get to determine, they get to make the God of their life. They get to determine how that God's going to act. They get to determine what that God's going to do. If they walk the streets and they determine there's no God to fulfill their desires, there's no God for them to bow down to, that they themselves want to bow down to, no worries, I'll just go make my own. To us it sounds silly, but when we really think about what idolatry is, if we really had to sum it up, if we really had to boil it down to its bare essence, idolatry can be simply summarized as a dethroning of God. That's what it is. It's taking God off of his throne and putting someone or something else in his place. In the Old Testament, they did that by making these little figurines, crafting these structures, bowing down to a piece of wood or a piece of metal. But idolatry still happens today. Maybe not in that way, but there are things in our life that, if we're being honest, sometime take the place of God. Perhaps we've been guilty of dethroning God in our life, taking something and elevating it past God, and as a result, that has become our God. It's idolatry. Now, I wish we had more time. I wish we could spend the rest of the time talking about what drives people into idolatry. We've mentioned it a little bit, right? But all the various ways. We could list a lot of things. What's lacking in a person's life, things like that. But what I want us to do for the remainder of this lesson is talk about 3 things that perhaps will guard us against the great sin of idolatry. And the first thing is clothing ourselves in humility. You know what leads people into idolatry? You know what leads people to dethrone God in their life and to put someone or something in his place? Arrogance, pride. And what is the cure for arrogance or pride? It's humility. Now, arrogance is sort of interesting to think about. We've all met arrogant people. Perhaps when the word is even said, somebody comes to your mind. But there are really 2 reasons why someone is arrogant. And I know that you've thought about this before, but let's just kind of lay it on the table again. Sometimes people are arrogant because they are just overly confident in their own abilities. This is generally the type of people I think we think about when arrogance or pride is mentioned. These are the people that think that they are God's gift to the earth and they can do everything well and they can learn anything they want to learn and they are just always better than every person that is on the face of the planet or that ever has lived. They're overly confident. That's why they're arrogant. But some people are arrogant because they're insecure. And we've met these types of people, and I bet you know these types of people, and perhaps you've thought that they're overly confident, but they're really not overly confident. In fact, they're very much insecure, but their insecurities have led them to sort of clothe themselves in confidence. Here's what I mean by that. People that are insecure know that they lack something to make them in their mind whole. So what they do is they latch on to the things that are secure, the things that they do well, their strengths, and they boast about those strengths, thinking that if they can tell people enough times about all the things that they do well, well, somehow that's going to make up for all the things that they don't do well. We've met these types of people. Some people are arrogant because they're just overly confident, thinking they're God's gift to the earth, and if they were to die, nobody could take their place. Some people are confident because they don't have a lot of confidence. They're actually very insecure. Arrogance and pride can lead a person to idolatry. Why? Because it puts all the pressure on self. For the person that's overly confident, they have placed all the pressure on self. It is all about them and what they can do. For the person that is insecure, it places all the pressure on self because they know that they lack something in their life, but it's up to them to try to make up for what they lack in their life. Make no mistake, we as Christians ought to admit that we don't have everything figured out, that we do lack a whole lot, but that's something that we lack. That's something that's going to make us whole, is not something that we ourselves can provide. It's something that's going to have to be given to us by God. But some people haven't bought into that idea, and as a result, they've placed something else in their life ahead of God. They've elevated something above God in their life. So some people are arrogant, and as a result, they've been led into idolatry, and they just need a good dose of humility. Colossians chapter 3 in verse 12 says this. Let me get my Bible open here. Colossians chapter 3 in verse 12, it says, "Put on then as God's chosen ones." So put on then. This is like clothing language, right? Put on then as God's chosen ones. How do God's chosen ones look? They are holy and beloved. They have compassionate hearts. They are kind. They are humble, they are meek, they are patient, they bear with one another. If anyone has a complaint against another person, they are people that forgive. God's people are humble. They don't think more of themselves than they ought to think. They recognize that they don't have everything figured out. They need God at the head of their life because they need God to drive their life. There's no room for arrogance. There's no room for pride in the life of a child of God. Number 2, people are driven toward idolatry because they lack discipline in their life. Okay, what in the world do I mean by that? Well, if we just take our idea of idolatry as a dethroning of God and putting something else or someone else in the place of God, well, that can happen because people want to control their life. Let me go in a little more depth. I think we all know as Christians that the Christian life, and by the way, this one right here, this helpful tip for avoiding idolatry, this is the one that gets me. This is the one I think that I struggle with the most. We all know that the Christian life is an extremely difficult life. It's life filled sometimes with sorrow. It's a life filled with pain. It's a life about denial. It's difficult to be a Christian, but the Christian life, no doubt, is the best life to live. When there are downs, there are always ups, and the ups always outweigh the downs. But God is with us. God is with us in the good times and the bad. Thank the Lord Jesus Christ for that. But the Christian life requires discipline. It requires self-control. Paul talks about this battle that I feel like I often lose more than I want to admit. There's this battle between flesh and spirit in our life. And in order for the spirit to overcome the flesh, it takes some work on our part. Let's not think that we're going to be able to sort of take control of the flesh on our own. That's not what the Bible teaches. We need the strength of God. We need God to give us peace in our life. We need His help to overcome the flesh. But there's this battle that's going on, and it does require effort on our part. It does require self-control. It does require discipline. And some people are not willing to discipline themselves in the way that God wants them to discipline themselves. They rather go after a host of other things. You fill in the blank: money, pleasure, reputation. What is it? What is driving our life? We need to be disciplined people. 1 Corinthians 10:13 talks about temptation. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, but God is faithful. He won't allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear, but will always provide a way of escape. Again, that verse involves the idea of endurance. If we're going to be self-controlled, if we're going to be disciplined, if God is leading our life, if we're walking by the Scriptures, we're going to struggle. It's going to be a battle. We're not always going to get what we want, because Christianity really is about crucifying those selfish desires, those those things that we want to go after. We got to endure. We got to have self-control. Some people are unwilling to do that, and as a result, they've dethroned God and put something or someone ahead of God. We need humility. We need discipline. Lastly, people go after, are driven toward idolatry because there's a lack of fulfillment in their life. There is a hole, so to speak, in their heart that they cannot fill. That hole ought to be filled by God, but for whatever reason, person hasn't figured that out, and they've tried to go after all sorts of things. Again, you name it: money, pleasure, reputation, so many things. We need fulfillment. Fulfillment in life is a good thing. It's what makes us aware that we have a purpose in life. A life without fulfillment would be absolutely, positively terrible. But it's, where does that fulfillment come from? Some people have convinced themselves that they know exactly what would fulfill their life, and if it's anything other than God, I guarantee you can talk to a person, or maybe we realize it ourselves because we've been guilty of dethroning God in our life and placing, I know I've said it a lot, but I want us to get this point, someone or something else in his place. And those things that we thought would fulfill us: pleasure, money, reputation. It's just three, but three things a lot of people are looking for. They didn't fulfill us at all. In fact, they probably made us feel empty. Maybe more so than before we chose to pursue that certain pleasure or way of life. We need fulfillment, but where our fulfillment comes from matters. Jeremiah 29:11. We could probably all quote this verse, but I'll read it to us. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil. Plans to give you a future and a hope. Plans, we might say, to fulfill us. Plans to make us whole. 1 John 14:6, Jesus says himself, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. Jesus is saying, if you want to find fulfillment in life, if you want to be satisfied, you better be walking the path, and that path is me. I'm going to give you fulfillment. You're going to experience a life in me that you would not experience anywhere else in the world, or following after someone else or something else. God gives us fulfillment. He's everything that we need. It's just a matter of, do we recognize that or not? If we look into our lives, I guarantee we'll recognize a point, or maybe we're at that point, where we realize we've dethroned God in our life. We're chasing after someone or something other than God. He's not directing our course of life anymore. We need to get back to God. We need to be clothed in humility. We need to be disciplined people. We need to realize that fulfillment is a good thing if it's found in Jesus Christ. Idolatry is just as real in the present as it was in the past. The Scriptures and the great love of our God can guard us from that great sin. This is the end of our lesson. I hope that you have a great rest of the week. I can't wait to see everybody Sunday. God bless.